So the inspiration behind the exhibition really is the ongoing research I'm doing on the history of the cannibal in Southeast Asia. The cannibal is a figure that comes up especially in the encounters between Western colonial explorers and adventurers and missionaries and Southeast Asia and island in Asia. And in the encounters between the West and Southeast Asia and islandic Asia, often the figure of the cannibal comes up as a way to describe the natives. And it seems to me that it is a way to think of the natives as uncivilized and savage and unsophisticated and violent. And thinking about that in the pre-colonial times to the colonial times also led me to think about the ghost stories that I grew up with and to think about the ghost stories that I hear a lot as I travel through Southeast Asia. And I think that often these ghost stories are not just about our fear of the unknown, but sometimes are about the fear of the known, the fear of who we know to be foreign or strange, not just from the outside, and sometimes it's among us. So I thought about an exhibition that could connect the history from hundreds of years ago to the stories that we hear in the present, and joining them together through the works of artists but also of filmmakers. The exhibition has certain strands that run through the show. And one of the strands, of course, is how long has these stories been going on. So in the exhibition, we began with the deep history. So it begins with a room where I present my research on the history of the cannibal, but also with Chitti's work on the early encounters between the Thai kingdom and outsiders. And these outsiders are both the Burmese historically, but Chitti is also considering the encounters between the Kingdom of Siam as well as Western colonial powers. And in his work, you will see how the Thai monarch that has negotiated its place and its difference with the various powers, sometimes violently through wars, but also through diplomatic means, through treaties and missions. From there, in much of the first floor, we also looked at earlier stories of Zheng He's voyage westward in its encounters between the Ming Empire and different foreign territories. Through a very unique figure, someone who is of Muslim descent, but also worshipped as a Buddhist, Taoist deity, someone who's a eunuch, but also central to the Ming Empire's assertion of power. And we move on from this deep history centuries ago through to the present, where we examine contemporary negotiations of identity with Abdullah's work, for example, of how someone who has Malaysian heritage, now living in Australia, wrestle and contend with impressions of where someone who is Muslim might belong or not belong, how they are seen and not seen. And as we move to the second floor, we move properly to think about the images of ghosts and ghouls and monsters. We begin to think about how the history that we've heard and seen begin to influence the present. We then look more closely at certain conflicts between races in one specific country. For example, in Sri Lanka, between the Sinhalese Buddhist majority and the Tamil Hindu minority. And we also looked at the negotiations of identity and belonging of Thailand, again, the contemporary Thailand with its neighbors, with Myanmar and Cambodia, with the fluid and frequent migrations of labor between these countries in Nipan's work. And we also examine, in yet another strand, who is queer and how in different contexts, in Zarina's work in Singapore, as well as in Lien's work in Cambodia. So the exhibition is called Stories We Tell to Scare Ourselves With. And I had thought of the exhibition as a way of thinking about the fear of the other. And especially in this present moment where we are experiencing rising nationalisms. So I'm thinking a lot about what it means to deal with or experience the foreigner, to think about the outsider, to think about who is we feel are intruding on our space, and who we feel belongs to our space. And often these things come to us as stories we hear from others who have gone through these encounters, both in our history, but also in this present moment. And often these stories are the stories we tell to assure ourselves that maybe we belong here. And it also reassures us of who we are protected against. So when I thought of the title, I wanted to think mostly about our perspective, how we think of we, how we think of we versus them. And so the title really, instead of just landing right on ghost, for example, I wanted to us all, both the audience and the artists, to think about how we communicate this idea of we, and especially communicating these stories through fear.